Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. The Admiral stared at the screen, his claws shaking. Not from fear. Not anymore. Fear was something you felt before the fire. This was different. This was the quiet that came after everything you built had turned to ash. Around him, what was left of the command ship creaked and groaned, like it knew it was dying too. Where there should have been stars, the window showed only wreckage. Broken ships floated like bones, spinning slowly in the cold dark. And right in the middle of it all, small and sharp and wrong, was a human ship. It was shaped like a blade someone had thrown and forgotten, burned black, scarred, still. Not moving, not firing, but not touched. The only thing left untouched. The Admiral blinked hard. He had seen it during the fight. It hadn't run. It hadn't even dodged. It had gone straight into the heart of the battle like it didn't care about dying. Like it wanted to be seen. Like it was delivering a message no one was ready to read. "Show me the last combat feed," he said, his voice more breath than sound. The officer beside him didn't answer right away. His skin had gone pale. His hands hovered over the controls, hesitating. "Sir, you don't want to see that again." "I need to." The screen flickered, static at first, then flashes of movement. Human ships, clunky and strange, darting between the lines of the great armada like insects. The alien fleet had surrounded them, outnumbered them 100-1. But that didn't matter. The humans didn't follow rules. They didn't follow logic. They broke formation, flew solo, sacrificed entire ships just to take down one piece of tech no one had ever thought to protect. And in the middle of it, that ship, the same one still floating now. It had crashed through 3 cruisers, lost half its body, and kept going. In the final seconds of the feed, the camera caught the human captain inside, face covered in blood, one eye swollen shut, smiling, not with joy, not with madness, with something deeper, like he knew something the Admiral didn't. The feed cut out. The silence on the bridge stretched long. The Admiral's throat was dry. What kind of creature smiles when everything is burning? No one answered. The human ship outside didn't move. It didn't need to. It had already delivered the message. The bridge was quiet except for the distant groans of the broken ship around them. Somewhere in the hull, a coolant line hissed out its last breath. The air tasted of smoke and melting wires, and still the human warship drifted, watching them like a ghost that refused to leave. The Admiral, once a name spoken in whispers across star systems, stood frozen. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because every word he could speak felt too small for what had happened. He looked down at his hands, stained with soot and oil, trembling not from weakness, but from something deeper. Understanding. The kind that came too late. They had wanted war. They had declared it boldly, proudly, without hesitation. The Gorthak Empire, massive and ancient, had spread across half the stars in the known galaxy. It had won every campaign it ever launched. It had crushed rebellions before they even had names. When Earth had resisted, when the humans had refused to kneel, they had laughed. They called humanity primitive, fragile, disorganized. They had been right. And still they lost. "We had the advantage," the Admiral whispered, almost to himself. "We had the numbers. We had the strategy. We had no soul, someone said behind him. He turned. It was one of the junior officers, barely old enough to serve in fleet command. The scales on his cheeks were singed. A bandage covered one eye, but his voice didn't waver. They fought like they didn't care if they died, the young officer said, because they weren't fighting to win. They were fighting because we took everything from them. The words stung more than the smoke. The admiral turned back to the screen. That's what we never understood, he murmured. We thought if we broke their armies, they would kneel. But we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting orphans, widows, survivors. He looked at the human vessel again. It hadn't moved. Not a single engine flare. Not a signal. Just presence. A reminder. That was the worst part. The silence. Not silence like fear. Not the kind before a battle. This silence was something heavier. A silence that followed loss so deep it cracked something inside your soul. The kind of silence that knew no answer would ever be good enough. He remembered the first colony they took, Mars Station K-12. It had barely held together under its own gravity shields. The people there had nothing but mining tools and stubbornness. The Gorthak ships had leveled it in one pass. The screams had been short, the resistance brief. He'd ordered it, called it efficient. Now, he remembered the faces. He remembered the footage of a mother holding her child under a collapsed tunnel, shielding them both with her own body while the dust took them. She had looked straight into the emergency camera before the blast hit, eyes filled with fear and defiance. The admiral's fists clenched. He remembered the debrief after that strike, how they had called it a clean operation, how his officers had toasted him for cutting off Earth's resource chain early, how they had laughed when the humans sent out a warning message, begging them to stop. He hadn't listened. No one had. And now, the price of that arrogance floated outside their shattered bridge in the form of a half-destroyed warship still whispering, "We're not done." A light blinked red on the console beside him. Incoming transmission. No encryption. Again. The officer hesitated. "Put it through," the admiral ordered. The screen crackled. Then, her face appeared. Commander Rylan Voss of Earth's 7th Front. She looked older than he remembered, tired in the eyes, deep lines on her face, but unbroken. Her uniform was torn again, ash-stained, one shoulder patched with old alien armor. But her voice, steady, controlled. "To what's left of the Gorthak fleet," she said, not yelling, just talking, like it was personal, like it always had been. "We asked you not to come. We told you not to bring your warships. We begged you not to test your weapons on our cities. But you did it anyway. And now—" She paused, her expression unreadable. "Now we don't fight to win. We fight so you remember what you did. We fight so your children grow up afraid of our shadows. We fight because you taught us how." The screen went black. That was it. No threat, no demand. Just the truth, wrapped in calm words and a voice that held more weight than all the fire their fleet had thrown. The admiral leaned against the console, his breathing slow and ragged. "What do we do now?" the junior officer asked, his voice low. The admiral didn't answer right away. His mind wandered back to the war councils, the simulations, the confidence, He remembered how the models had shown Earth falling within 6 cycles. The strategists had said the humans would fracture under pressure, that their outdated tech and loose alliances would crumble once pushed. But what the models had never accounted for was desperation. Desperation didn't follow patterns. It didn't make sense on a battlefield. It didn't care about losses. It only cared about making the enemy feel the pain, the exact pain you had once felt tenfold. He finally spoke. They're not fighting for land, or planets, or power. Then what are they fighting for? The officer asked. The admiral looked down at his hands again. Memory, he said. They want us to remember every scream, every name, every broken family. They want it to haunt us forever. The officer swallowed. They're doing a good job, he whispered. Another alarm pulsed. Damage report. Life support failing in 2 more decks. No reinforcements inbound. No response from the rest of the fleet. There wasn't much left to command. And outside, the human ship remained, silent, still, and watching. Like a sentinel, like a grave marker, like a ghost that wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The admiral had never seen ships move like that. The battle hadn't begun with a warning shot or formal engagement. It didn't start with orders exchanged between command fleets or with clean, synchronized maneuvers like in the simulations. No, it started with chaos. Sudden, fast, and violent. The kind that struck before you could speak, before you could understand. And by the time you did understand, it was already too late. The Gorthak fleet, proud and powerful, had taken position across 5 vectors, 123,000 vessels, each one crafted for precision warfare, flawless hulls, energy shields layered like woven steel, and weapon systems that could erase moons. The formation alone had caused planetary scanners to overload. Then came the humans. Barely over 1,000 ships, smaller, older. Their engines leaked radiation trails. Their signals were a mess of static and background noise. Some of them looked like they had been stitched together in orbit, armor scraped from scrap yards and meteors. The admiral had laughed when he saw them. Not out loud, but inside, where confidence still lived. 1,000 against 100,000. What could they possibly do? Then the first wave hit. A squadron of human corvettes tore through Vector 9's outer perimeter. They didn't engage the Gorthak ships head-on. They ducked beneath them, zipped through their ranks like insects darting through forest roots. Before any defense systems could lock on, explosions burst through the line. But they weren't hitting the ships. They were hitting the relays, the blind spots, the communication links, the auxiliary heat exhausts. Small, meaningless targets. Except they weren't meaningless. Within minutes, half the Gorthak command links went dark. The admiral's second-in-command had panicked. They're not targeting ships, he said. They're dismantling the spine. And they were. The humans didn't fight in a line. They didn't follow formations. They moved like fire, flickering, splitting, flanking, vanishing. A ship would break formation and vanish into a plasma cloud, only to reappear in the blind zone of a destroyer, ramming into its reactor core like a knife between ribs. Entire human squadrons would dive directly into battleships, ignoring their own survival, and blow apart entire decks from within. It wasn't a strategy. It was vengeance. And it worked. The Admiral stood now at what remained of the bridge, watching the final moments of the recorded feed. One screen showed a Gorthak cruiser splitting in half, not from external weapons, but from a human dropship that had embedded itself into its engine spine and detonated inside. The vessel cracked open like fruit, blooming with fire. On another screen, a human gunship had docked with one of the Gorthak supply carriers, not to raid, not to take prisoners, but to overload its core and leave it drifting, a ticking bomb. Seconds later, it exploded, taking 5 other ships with it. Friendly fire, chain reaction. They had planned for that, and in the center of it all was that ship, the one still floating outside. It had come from nowhere. Its signature was invisible until it was already in their line. It didn't fire a single shot. Instead, it acted like a conductor. The human fleet moved around it, responded to it. It was the eye of the storm. And the humans? They were the storm itself. The feed showed a shot from inside the warship's bridge. The human commander sat upright, strapped into a damaged chair. Sparks rained down from broken panels. Blood soaked his uniform. His crew lay still. Some unconscious, some clearly gone. And still, he smiled. That same smile. The one that made the Admiral's stomach twist. Not joy, not madness. Certainty. The commander whispered something before the feed cut out. The translator had to guess. This is the part where you learn. And then the light swallowed everything. The Admiral hadn't spoken during the entire replay. He couldn't. Words felt like lies in the face of what he had seen. He turned away from the screen and looked around at the remnants of his crew. Scorched faces. Blank stares. Silence, so thick it felt like gravity. No one had expected this. Not their tacticians. Not the AI analysts. Not the admirals who had crushed entire solar systems under coordinated orbital fire. No one. Because no one had accounted for a species that didn't care about surviving the fight, as long as the story of the fight reached the next enemy. He limped to the viewport and stared again at the drifting warship. Still, it floated. No distress signal, no beacon, no surrender. It just watched, as if it were waiting for something or someone. He didn't flinch when the console pinged again. Another transmission. No encryption. This time, it wasn't a live feed. It was a recording. It showed a group of human children. Not fighters. Not soldiers. Just kids. In a ruined classroom. Walls blackened, desks splintered, and the sky visible through the broken ceiling. One of the children was reading from a datapad. His voice was quiet but clear. My name is Cal. I was 7 when they came. They took my sister. They took my mom. They burned my house. I'm still here. And I remember. The video ended. The Admiral said nothing. No one on the bridge moved. They didn't need to, because in that moment, they all understood. The humans weren't sending these messages to win the battle. They were sending them to last, to live inside the minds of their enemies, to plant fear so deep it wouldn't wash away with time. He whispered it before he even knew he was saying it aloud. They're not trying to beat us. They're trying to teach us. The bridge lights dimmed again, not by command but by power failure. Systems that were never meant to break had begun flickering like dying stars. Life support was running on backup reserves, and structural integrity had dropped below safe thresholds. Yet no one moved. The admiral remained at the viewport, staring at the human ship adrift in the black, a silent messenger in a sea of death. The voice from the child still echoed in his ears. I remember. That was the point. Not to terrify, not to brag, not even to celebrate. It was to remind, to burn the memory so deeply into their minds that it would never leave. Even in victory, even if the Empire somehow pulled itself from the ashes of this humiliation, the humans wanted the Gorthak to remember. The Admiral's thoughts were broken by another transmission. This one didn't blink or ping. It simply arrived, quietly, as though it had always been there, waiting to be opened. There was no heading, no request, no demands. He hesitated, then played it. The screen lit up once more, showing her face again. Commander Rylan Voss, the same human woman who had spoken before. Only this time, she was in a darker place. No lights, no sounds of battle in the background, just shadows. The flicker of a fire somewhere out of view. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at the camera. Her eyes didn't carry rage. Not anymore. That would have been easier to face. What they carried was resolve. You still think this is about a battle, she said finally, voice soft, slow. You think this is about ships, tactics, weapons. It's not. She leaned forward, and even through the static of a broken comm line, her gaze felt too close, like she wasn't talking to a fleet or a general, like she was talking directly to him. This is about who gets to shape the story. The Admiral's throat tightened. Your empire, she continued, has told the same story for centuries. Power, obedience, control. You land, you dominate, you erase, you teach fear, and then call it order. She looked away for a moment, her voice quieter now. We told you to leave Earth alone. We begged, pleaded. But your warships came anyway. You bombed our cities. You experimented on our people. You melted our monuments and laughed while we cried. You made us feel small, weak. She turned back to the screen, eyes shining with something more dangerous than hate. But you forgot something. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a necklace, a small metal disc hanging from a thin cord. A child's toy. The Admiral didn't recognize it, but it meant something to her. And that was the point. When we lose everything, she said, holding it up, we don't get weaker. We become something else. You taught us that, so now we're teaching you. The screen went black. No follow-up, no explanation, just silence. Again. And yet, that silence said more than all the screams of war. The Admiral stood there, unmoving, even as smoke curled around his legs. The last working console behind him sparked. Another officer collapsed from exhaustion, still clutching a med kit in his claws. No one had the strength to speak. The message hadn't just reached him, it had infected the ship. The air felt heavier, the light dimmer. Even the sound seemed distant, like the ship itself was holding its breath. He could hear the whispers in his mind now. Not from his crew, not from the officers, from every decision he had made, every step that had brought them here, every ignored warning, every dismissed plea. He remembered the day Earth was declared an unsecured resource zone. He had read the report, approved the cleansing, recommended relocation of the population for experimental integration. They hadn't resisted at first. Not really. They had tried to speak. They had sent messages, primitive, yes, but filled with hope, desperate, fragile hope. And the Empire had laughed. Let them beg, one general had said. They'll fall faster if they realize how powerless they are. But the humans hadn't begged again after that. They had vanished, hidden, built in the shadows. And now they had returned, not as an army, as a memory. The admiral turned, stepping over a fallen beam to reach the auxiliary panel. He punched in a command, pulling up fleet reports. What he saw chilled him more than any message. Fleet 7, gone. No signal, no debris. Station Juno, offline. Final entry, logged as total blackout. Sensors compromised. And Threx 5, the primary weapons depot of the southern quadrant, reduced to rubble. Surface readings showed no survivors. He backed away from the screen. They weren't just fighting battles. They were erasing foundations, crippling the Empire not through firepower, but through fear, through story. And it was working. He knew it was working because he felt it too. That pulse in his chest, the tightness behind his eyes, the awareness, not just of defeat, but of being understood. The humans had studied them, not just their tactics, their beliefs, their patterns, their psychology, and they had used it against them. This wasn't just war. It was theater. And every message, every floating ship, every deliberate silence was a scene, a performance designed to plant one single seed in the mind of every Gorthak who saw it. You are no longer untouchable. He steadied himself against the wall. The metal was warm, probably from a nearby fire. He didn't care. What terrified him more was the thought that this wasn't over, that this wasn't even the worst of it. Because they hadn't finished with him. They were still talking to him. They wanted him alive. They wanted him to carry the message. They wanted him to become the voice that told the rest of the galaxy what humans had become. And the worst part? He understood why. They wanted him to feel what they had felt: helplessness, humiliation, and the slow, creeping realization that no one was coming to help. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Because deep down, he knew. This wasn't humanity's revenge. This was their lesson. And the class had only just begun. The Admiral didn't sleep for 3 rotations. There wasn't time. And even if there had been, sleep was no longer a refuge. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the human faces again. Not in battle, not with guns, but after. Holding the bodies of their loved ones, digging graves with bare hands, sending messages into the void, not because they expected a reply, but because they needed someone, anyone, to remember them. And now, they were remembered. The High Command still hadn't sent reinforcements. Not that it mattered. Most of the relay stations had gone dark. Communications were patchy at best. And the few that still responded sounded like ghosts. Voices wrapped in static, asking questions no one could answer. Where did they go? Why aren't we detecting their fleet? Why are there no bodies? The Admiral sat in the dim control center of a barely functioning cruiser, one of the last left from the once mighty armada. His command staff had dwindled to less than a dozen. Supplies were low. Morale even lower. He didn't issue orders anymore. He told stories. Not heroic ones, not the kind that made soldiers cheer. He told truths about Earth, about the girl named Talia, about the cities they burned and the people they took, about the warnings they ignored. And slowly, something shifted. The officers didn't look at him like a leader anymore. They looked at him like a survivor, someone who had seen what they were too afraid to name. Extinction, not of a species, of power. The Empire hadn't fallen with a scream. It had rotted from the inside, from fear. The humans hadn't needed to fire on every world. They just needed one fleet, one battle, one message. And now, across the stars, the cracks spread. The colonies began to splinter. Governors refused orders. Commanders stopped responding. And then, defections. Not just from conquered species, those were expected, but from within. Gorthak scientists leaking files, soldiers sabotaging their own systems, engineers trading access codes for safe passage. The story was no longer in the humans' hands. The Gorthak were telling it for them now. "I received a message," one of the young tacticians said, stepping quietly into the command center. His voice shook, but not from fear, from disbelief. It came from a mining outpost in Sector 4C. The Admiral looked up, hollow-eyed. What did it say? The officer hesitated, then held out a data slate. The message was short. "We surrender, not because of weapons, but because we've seen what you survived, and we no longer believe we deserve to win." The Admiral closed his eyes. It was done. Not the fighting. Pockets of resistance would continue. The Empire would flail, clawing at whatever scraps of pride it could hold. But the war, the real war, the one of belief, was over. They had lost it long before the battle. They lost it when they underestimated grief. They lost it when they mistook silence for weakness. They lost it when they hurt people who only ever asked to be left alone. And now? Now those people stood where once stood giants. 6 months later, the Admiral walked the ruins of Veltrax, the former capital of Sector 12. The city had once been a monument to Gorthak dominance, steel towers that touched the clouds, barracks lined with discipline, streets paved with history. Now, silence. Human banners flapped in the wind, not of conquest, but of warning. A promise etched in fire and loss. Never again. The survivors had rebuilt. Strange patchwork colonies of humans, aliens, and former enemies now living side by side. There were no parades, no flags waving in victory, just work, farming, medicine, quiet education. The Admiral, once feared across 5 systems, was not recognized. He wore no rank, no uniform, just scars and silence, a walking ghost among those still trying to live. He visited a memorial near the center of the city. Names were etched into black stone, some in human letters, some in Gorthak script. No pictures, no titles, just the words, "They remembered. So we remember." As he stood there, a voice behind him spoke. "You came." He turned. Commander Rylan Voss. She was older now, her armor lighter, a healing brace around one leg. But her eyes were the same, calm, hard, and watching. He nodded once. "I had to see," he said quietly. She stepped up beside him. "Most of your kind wouldn't. Most of my kind are gone. They stood in silence for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Do you understand now?" The Admiral didn't answer right away. "I think I always did," he said. "I just didn't want to." She looked at him. "We didn't want war either." "I know." He turned to her, voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't just win. You changed us. That's something no empire has ever done before." Rylan gave a tired smile, not proud, not angry, just tired. "Now you know what it feels like." And with that, she walked away, leaving him alone with the names and the wind. Far above, in orbit, the wreck of the original human warship still drifted. They hadn't recovered it. They had left it there. A symbol, a memory, a story. Because in the end, that ship wasn't a weapon. It was a truth. And the truth had finally been delivered. They wanted war. The human warship delivered it.